I'm the Owners Council Director for the Pacific region of DBIA, and I'm greatly assisted by Eric Kissauer, and Eric's going to be joining me in just a second. Wanted to take a moment to welcome everybody. Appreciate your listening in. This is I guess our second or third webinar, Owners Council webinar for 2017. We greatly appreciate your attending and showing interest. Often at Owners Council events we have sponsorships. These webinars have allowed us to really get by without the need of a specific title sponsor, but if a firm is so inclined in the future, we would certainly entertain that. Today's seminar will be put on by Mr. Phil Croessmann of MWH, and shortly, right after Eric is able to do some DBIA briefing of information, we'll turn it over to Phil, but at this moment I'll turn it over to Eric, and again appreciate your attendance.
Good afternoon, everybody. Really appreciate everybody showing up for this webinar. As Mike said, it's our third one for the year, and as we advance the slide, Skosh. As you see our mission and vision here, everybody can read, so I don't have to read it to you, and I'm sure you've all seen this before. So, but we just want to remind everybody that we're trying to stay cognizant of our mission and vision. Here's some information and training that's coming up. We want to make sure that you realize that this manual of practice is free to everybody that's a member here, and this is an invaluable source of information. Getting your DBIA designated professional certification is becoming more and more important as a lot of owners are putting it into their qualifications package. And online learning, we've got this is 24/7 access to that, and some of the education courses that are listed here that are coming up in the DBIA training. We're always looking for volunteers. The Western region is the largest in the whole country. These are the committees that we've got. If you see something of interest to you, please feel free to get in touch with Gloria, and she can get you hooked into that. With our Owners Council, we have scholarships available for training and for the credential and workshops, boot camps. So if you go to the website there, it's you can get hooked into that. One of the really great things about what we've done is both at the national level and at the regional level, we have owners hotlines. So you see how to get hooked into that. And then you can post your project announcements here too, so that you're actually hooking into those design builders who are more attuned to the delivery model itself. Some upcoming events that we've got here: there's a national certification in Los Angeles. We have a breakfast in Los Angeles that you can see there, an evening presentation in San Diego, another breakfast in Los Angeles. We have a board meeting. All members are able to attend board meetings. You don't have to be on the board. And then our next Owners Council webinar is September 6th. Just as an aside, we've got an event coming up in conjunction with the Construction Specifications Institute that's going to be at the St. Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco on July 16th as well. So that's where we are for our upcoming events. So at this point, there's our website, and we'd hope you enjoy the conversation with Phil. Let me encourage everybody to submit questions. If there's any confusion here about where we're going, what we're doing, we can straighten it out right now. So with that in mind, here's Phil Croessmann.
Thank you. I want to give you a little introduction about who I am. I have spent about 20 to 25 years as a construction lawyer solving construction claims on projects, and most recently I've spent about 5 years in-house working on construction claims from both the contractor's point of view and the owner's. So today we'd like to talk about risk management and design build from the owner's perspective. And to put it simply, I think what that means is how to stay out of court and how to resolve claims quickly and easily throughout the construction process. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at what the sources of construction claims are and why this is a problem in the industry. And then we're going to talk about some risk management techniques that you can use either before construction and during the construction process. And then we're going to talk about some actual construction claims. And the reason we do that is so that you can see how the issues we've talked about earlier can play into how the construction claims are resolved. Now we're going to focus this primarily on design build, but since these are issues that are covered in all areas of construction, of course we'll use some examples from other places besides design build, but I think you'll find that they're quite applicable. So let's just look at kind of the source of claims and how frequent claims are. This is a study that was done by McGraw-Hill in 2011. And what you can see is that about 84% of the infrastructure projects reported that they had some kind of a scheduling problem, that they reported a delay at the end of the job. And of those same types of projects, 86% reported that their projects were over budget. And of those claims, you can see the large majority of them had disputes. And so what we have to ask ourselves is where do these claims come? Now, you can say, well, design build or construction management at risk or the traditional design bid build, some of these claims wouldn't occur on those projects. But what we see is that there are some permutations. So it is useful to say, look at where do the claims come from, what gives rise to them, because it gives you the major factors that you need to look at when you're talking about risk management. So we see by far the great majority of claims come out of technical design and engineering. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a designing error or something like that. It just means that there's maybe a misunderstanding about what the specs say or what the drawings portray, and it's got to be resolved on the project. The second most prevalent is schedules. If there's delays or changes in the schedule or resequencing, these are areas where a lot of claims come out of. And then, of course, just changes in the cost, which makes sense. The fourth area is contractual risk. This is where maybe your liability comes out of a shift of contractual responsibility or some other aspect of the contract, maybe unforeseen condition, a force majeure, or something like that. And then political environment, and that's frankly one that I don't know much about. I think you guys all know probably a lot more about that than I do, so I'll skip that one. When we look at the type of claims, it's nice to understand where do these claims come from and why do they matter to the contractor, who's typically the person bringing the claim. First, the critical path delay. You've got a period of time in which you have to construct the project. Any time of delay that causes the critical path to go on further means more overhead and cost spent. So that kind of understanding of the schedule and how it plays into the construction of the project is extremely important. The other thing is when there's a delay, has there been an acceleration? And one thing I would ask you to look at in part of your risk management process is often there's a delay on the project, and rather than looking at acceleration as a solution to that delay, people tend to argue more about who's responsible. And what you'll find is that often acceleration can be a much cheaper and cost-efficient way to deal with the delay than actually letting the delay play out in the construction. The other thing that I think is probably the most misunderstood area of claims is productivity. Labor and equipment inefficiencies are probably the biggest problem a contractor has on a job. Whether you're taking crews and moving them from one structure to another or sequencing the work in a manner that's inefficient, these can cause huge cost to the project. And depending on how your contract is structured and whose responsibility it is for those delays, it's really becomes important to understand where productivity losses come in. I've seen situations where small contractors who had concrete work to do, for example, there was one contractor, he had a $500,000 job, but because he didn't deploy his forces in an efficient manner and in a properly sequenced manner, it ended up costing him $1 million to do that $500,000 worth of work. So the impact can be quite extraordinary. The other thing is the cumulative impact of changes. Sometimes there's a lot of little changes or people don't process the changes properly, and there's a cumulative impact that builds up that can be quite sufficient. So we need to keep that in mind as we look at risk management and how we deal with these issues. I think we've all dealt with differing site conditions. I have to know how to respond to them. It has to be considered during the bidding phase and the project delivery. Who's going to be responsible for them? How are we going to mitigate for them, and how are we going to deal with them as they arise? And the last area is design errors and omissions. You know, these can be both errors in the design itself or omissions, or it can be constructability issues. The design works fine, it's just very difficult to construct or more costly to construct. Now, as we look and remember that these are not design build numbers, but these are industry-wide numbers. What you can see is the size of the claim can be quite significant. Many claims being in the $1 million range. So, you know, we're talking about real money here, and it really pays to invest some money early on to kind of mitigate those claims and keep them down. So now let's look at some of the major techniques we could use for risk management. Of course, first we have the risk management that you do at the pre-construction phase, and the first thing you have to look at is how are you going to deliver your project? What method are you going to use? And the thing to remember about these different methods is each one has a unique characteristic. They all have advantages and disadvantages, and you have to think really long and hard about what you're trying to achieve on the project and which one of these delivery methods will give you the kind of advantages that you're looking for and how you're going to deal with the disadvantages involved. So let's look at design build. You know, we all talk about how design build works and what's its advantages and disadvantages, and later on I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see personally as the design build advantages. But some of the things that are commonly pointed to is a single point of responsibility for design and construction. Now this can be a great advantage. You can have basically one person to look to. You can have a single point of responsibility. You don't have to worry about the contractor and the designer pointing fingers at each other. But at the same time, it can also give you a problem of will you actually get what you want? How do you know that when you turn the design over to the other party, that design is going to reflect your needs and wants on the project? And one of the things you got to grapple with is, are you looking for a performance specification or a prescriptive specification? So you need to really give some thought about, do I really care what kind of pumps I want on the project or what kind of equipment? Or is it more important that I just get the lowest price pump that does the job? A lot of times you'll find, you know, we work in the water area, and a lot of the operators really have a preference for a particular kind of pump or a particular kind of method of operation. And if they don't keep control of that portion of the design, they're not going to get what they want. So that's just, you know, these are advantages and disadvantages that can cut both ways. It's just a question of understanding what you're looking for. You know, design build has been, you know, the competitions and particularly have been criticized as being costly and difficult to procure. But then there's other design build methods where you can use progressive design build to ameliorate that and really have a much less expensive procurement process and a much more collaborative joint working team that produces the project. You know, fast track is one that's talked about a lot, but you really have to question, is fast track what you're looking for, and is that something that's suitable for design build? A lot of people say it eliminates change orders. I think that's correct, but you have to also be concerned about not having control of that design. Are you going to end up with something that you're not interested in? So as you look through the advantages and disadvantages, you really need to think about what does this delivery method offer to me, and how can I then manage the risks that I'm going to be exposed with? But no matter what method you use, your number one source of risk management on any project is the contract. And it's very important that you look through and create a contract that achieves the goals that you're looking to achieve. And you know, we've got good contracts in the United States that have been developed over hundreds of years. DBIA, of course, has their standard contracts. And what you'll find is consistent in all of them is that they have clear notice requirements of when a problem comes up. They usually have a duty to mitigate so that you can look to the other side or whoever else is working on the problem to try to minimize the costs and impact of the thing. They have robust schedule requirements. Is the schedule going to be a good tool for the construction, and are you going to be able to rely upon it to know what the contractor's doing and where he's getting on the project? Because so often we see when the schedule is not given enough time and attention, that then it can become a tool of the contractor to be used against the owner. And because of the failing of understanding how the schedule works, the owner can not be in the best position to defend against a claim or to resolve a problem as it comes up, or even to know if his project's going to be finished on time. Have a definite change order process. You know, change orders are a fact of life. I mean, they just happen on almost every job. They're not a bad thing, and often there's situations that come up where their changes are needed. What is a problem is when the change order process doesn't work efficiently, because when that happens, the contractor is in a position where he cannot build the project quickly and efficiently, understanding what's required of him, and there's uncertainty in terms of whether the change order is going to be funded or not. So having an order to, you know, a process where you can work through these issues, and there's always going to be disputes, but if you can work through them in an orderly fashion and understand what you do when you can't agree on something and keep the project moving, that is essential to getting the project done and doing it efficiently. Coordination with others, outside agencies. You know, is it really in your interest as the owner to have the contractor dealing with certain agencies that you might have a better relationship with, and you're able to talk to more freely and to obtain the permits and consents that you need in order to move the thing forward? Finally, have a good dispute resolution process. And what we mean by that is have a process that allows the parties to work through their differences in a timely manner, but also in a manner that's not too abrupt. You don't want to have just one meeting and then jump into litigation, because nobody wants to go into litigation. No one certainly wants to litigate during the construction project. But if you have a process that you can go through, and we'll look at some of the processes in the claims that we'll talk about later, and how those were effective, and you know, really communicating the differences between the parties and finding solutions to those issues. The second thing is, you know, a lot of times I think owners feel like, well, I signed a contract with the design builder, and now I can just sit back and wait until that opening day and when I get the keys, and everything will be fine.
Phil, seems to be muted. 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 Phil, seems
Yeah, I'm not hearing him, Eric.
Want built.
He's not muted.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
We
there it
can
came
now,
back.
thank you.
Sorry. So you want to understand what the contractor is going to build. You also want to understand the time he's going to build it in. And this is where I think an owner's well off to have some kind of a consultant that understands the schedule, can look at what the contractor is proposing to do, make sure it's realistic. Because even though it may be the contractor's problem if he falls down, it's also your problem if you don't get your project delivered on time and you can't achieve the benefits of that project and when you expect to achieve them. Make sure you know who your contractors are. We certainly recommend, and I believe DBIA recommends, that you pre-qualify your contractors and your subcontractors, that you don't just go out and hire at low bid. And I think one of the advantages in design build is that you've got a procurement process which hopefully integrates the subcontractors with the general contractor and the owner, and you're not out there hiring the low bid contractor who may fall down on the job in the middle of the project. And understand your contractor's assessments of risk. I think it's valuable for you to know what the contractor sees as the problems on the project and how he's going to resolve them. And that brings us to the next topic, which is the risk management workshop. This is something we find extremely useful because it not only looks at the contractor's risks, but also the owner's risks and the other parties involved in the project of what their risks are. And this is a pretty simple process. You bring in experienced people from different disciplines and you have them sit down and walk through the project and kind of brainstorm as to what they see issues that could arise and how those issues need to be resolved. So you usually perform at a fairly early part of the project, but then it's not always it's often a useful thing to do it later in the project too. But basically what you're trying to identify is areas of uncertainty in the project that may occur. They might not occur, but if they do occur, they're going to have a substantial impact on the project. So there's a lot of models you can use to do this, but basically you're going to come in, you're going to figure out what's going to drive the risks and what the probability of the risks are. You're going to look at what the impacts are going to be and what's going to cause those impacts. And then you're going to take kind of a sum of those factors and you're going to come up with a risk loss profile. And then that profile can be used to establish things such as contingencies or other methods. So it's pretty, one model shows it pretty simply. You just take the probability of the event. If it's 25% chance of happening, times the probable impact. If it's $100,000 of impact that you expect from it, you multiply those out, you come up with a total amount of 25,000. That's what you might set aside in a risk contingency if you were going to deal with that problem just by setting money aside. But one of the things you're going to run into is you're going to find that there's hundreds of risks on every project. And if you try to manage all those risks, you're not going to be able to do it, and it's not going to be a very effective program, and you're not going to have the resources to do it. So what you want to do is you want to identify the major risks on the project, the ones that will have the most impact or are the most likely to occur, and identify what your top 10 priority lists are. And from those, you can then develop a mitigation strategy. So you can begin to look at, what can I do about this risk? Is it a risk I can eliminate by maybe using a different design or a different supplier or a different piece of equipment, and thereby eliminate the risk altogether? Or is it a risk that I really need to transfer to another party? Perhaps there's another party in the construction team that's better able to manage that risk and handle it and is better able to deal with it when it comes up. And that's something you can do, of course, through your contractual language. The other thing is there's possible redundancies that I could build into the system. If I'm worried about a piece of equipment being delivered on time and that piece of equipment is so crucial to the success of the project, I may want to be sure that I have two suppliers of that equipment and that they both have it in stock, so that if my primary supplier
Can't hear you again, Phil. We can't hear you, Phil.
Team that helped you brainstorm and assign the risks, and you assign them to an owner. So once you have your risk developed, you develop a log, and then you use that log. That should be a living document throughout the construction process, where you consider, you know, where am I on this risk? At some points in the project, risk will disappear or be managed, and then you can add new risks to the log and keep your 10 top priorities on that log. But it's a very successful tool, and this is one example of an early risk management log. I just put 2 examples in here, and these may or may not be an issue you deal with in a design build contract, although material escalations are sometimes excluded from the contractor's risk and made into an owner's risk in order to get a lower bid on the project. And these are just some very simple ways of trying to protect against material cost increases on the project. You can either lock in price guarantees, or you can purchase the equipment early if you have storage facilities for it, things like that. Very simple kind of techniques that can make a big difference in your project. So basically, these are the basic rules of processing a risk log and keeping it up to date. Next, when we're in construction, what can we do during the construction project? And I think that overwhelmingly, the #1 way of producing a good project with good results is clear communication. And you have to be able to have people on the project team who can talk to each other and have good rules for how you're going to communicate and when you're going to communicate issues. Secondly is you want a transparent decision-making process. If you're reviewing change orders, you want it to be very clear what the process is to have a change order reviewed, what's anticipated to be produced as part of that change order, and then you want to follow those rules and make sure you have the decision-making process be transparent and follow the rules that you've put through. Secondly, we want to make sure that there's accurate reporting and timely reporting. You want to keep good records on the project, and you want to make sure those records are timely and that people are given proper notice of when an issue arises. So often, claims and disputes are the result of people thinking different things happened on the project. And records, you can very quickly resolve those issues by simply exchanging records. And I've been on a lot of projects where the owner and contractor have voluntarily exchanged records so that they have a clear understanding of what everybody's position is and how that position was developed. Finally, try to resolve your issues at the lowest level. You don't want every change order to be a major battle. And you know, I've seen some projects where no change orders are ever approved until the end of the project. And while people may think that's a strategy for getting a good result, what I see is that drives the cost of those change orders up, and it increases the cost of construction, and it just generally makes it much more difficult to resolve the problems. If you can get your project managers and your project engineers to sit down together and resolve the issues quickly and efficiently, even if it's not the most perfect resolution of the problem or the most fair resolution of the problem, in the long run, it will be the cheapest resolution. Documentation, you know, understand the contract requirements, and review the information for accuracy. You know, when you get your schedule updates, go through them and make sure that they're accurate and that they're being updated and that people are being realistic. One thing that we see all the time with construction contracts is the contractor will have an extended period of time where he loses some time, and his answer to it is to just take another period of time schedule of work and condense it down into a shorter period of time. You know, when you begin to do that, usually it happens in the non-critical path areas. What you see is you're building up a tidal wave, and sooner or later all those time impacts are going to come home to roost, and you're going to have a major problem on the project. Make sure your contractors, subcontractors, and owners keep daily reports of what's happening on the job. So if you do have to go back and resolve a dispute, you have the information you need to know what happened out there on a day-to-day basis. Make sure the notices are followed and that they're given timely and properly, and that change orders are processed and kept up to date. And that's, you know, basically the same thing I've said here. The most important one is be timely and fair in your resolution of changes, because that is really essential to keeping a project on good footing and keeping a good relationship between the team. You know, a lot of times you have a project where one of the goals of the owner is to keep the money in the local community. And sometimes procurement laws, even under design build contracts, require, like for example, under a progressive design build contract, it may require the subcontractors to be procured on a low price, low bid basis. When you do that, you have at-risk contractors involved, and you need to really work with your general contractor to say, how are we going to manage these guys? We want them to have the work. We want them to be able to participate in the project, but we understand they might not have the sophistication necessary to do all the things we want them to do. And really, we look to the general contractor to work with those contractors and to make them successful. And so you have to understand when your subcontractors might get into trouble, and how are you going to step in and help them through that process. And one thing is, first of all, to identify that they're at risk, and there's a lot of telltale signs you can see of that, but then to kind of use the contract processes to escalate it, because what typically happens is the subcontractor will not recognize the problems he's in, and he'll kind of be in a state of denial. And you got to kind of break through that and figure out how you can intervene in the situation. You know, letting a contractor fall down on a job and then firing them and replacing them with another contractor is rarely a good solution, and it's one that costs everybody a lot of money. And you want to keep a good relationship with these guys, because, you know, the whole purpose of this was to put money in their pockets so they could spend it in your community, and you want to make sure that they're successful at that. Now, I'd like to go through some construction claims that I've handled in the past, and these are on construction management at risk policy projects. And you know, it doesn't really matter what kind of project you have a claim on. A claim is a claim, and they all are kind of handled the same way. So let's walk through some of those and see how they'll work. These are the elements that we use to analyze a claim, and you'll see the top box is entitlement. Now, what we see on a lot of projects, which I think is a major mistake, is the project engineer or the project manager, who's ever responsible for reviewing change orders, will come in and say, oh, there's no entitlement, we deny the claim, and they never want to deal with it beyond that. What we find is entitlement is always a gray issue. If it wasn't a dispute, there wouldn't be an argument over it, and the claim would be easily resolved. Because of it's such a gray area, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to resolve it during the construction project until you get to a third party who can make the decision for you. That means litigation or arbitration, and we don't really want to go there. So what we do is, after we look at entitlement, we analyze the claim itself to determine what the magnitude of the claim is and the impact. Because what we find is often the case is contractors will bring in large claims. You know, they might bring a $500,000 claim in, and when we finish analyzing it, we can prove that it's only a $50,000 claim. Well, once you reduce a claim from $500,000 to $50,000, you can pretty much work out the entitlement, because it's just not that difficult to do when the dollar amounts are not significant. So the first thing we do is we do a forensic schedule. and we take a look. I mean, we require the contractor to submit their schedule, but we look at it too. And then we also do forensic costs so that we can quantify the damages, develop a claim strategy, and develop any claims defenses such as notice and the like. So this was a project that I worked on. It was a $165 million water treatment plant. We were serving as the construction manager at risk. One of our obligations was to review and analyze claims submitted by subcontractors who were procured on a low bid basis without any pre-qualifications. And this is an analysis we performed in 4 weeks. Basically, we follow the same procedure with most. We get the claim in from the contractor, we analyze it, look at the subcontracts and analyze it in accordance with the agreements. And then we ask for additional information and we undertake our schedule analysis. In this case, we also hired an independent scheduling consultant to verify what we thought were the impacts on the schedule. So let me kind of give you some examples of what we look at. This was an accounting that he put in for one of his claims. He had like $14 million claims, but it was actually about 2.5 million. So in this one we looked, and in this one he was actually charging 10% overhead on LDs that he didn't think he should pay. So obviously that was an incorrect number. He had time in for overtime. But he had no backup for that or any way of how he calculated it, and understanding how it calculates makes a big difference on the amounts. He also had extended overhead in there, which he didn't have any backup for that. Plus, when we looked at the schedule for it, we found that he had 13 days of float in the successor activities. So it was very unlikely that this item was going to impact the critical path of the schedule. And actually, at the end of the delay period, he had 29 days or 25 days of working days float. So his float on the project actually increased, and there was no impact on the schedule. And then, you know, in terms of the overall claims, we took a look at, you know, the billings on the project. And this is an excellent way for an owner to track how your contractor's doing. We did a projection of what the billings should have been if he completed the project in accordance with the baseline schedule. And then we charted what his actual billings were. And as you can see, the blue line, he just wasn't billing enough, which if you translate that into what it means for the project, he wasn't performing the work as quickly as he had planned, and therefore he was falling behind schedule. So then we looked at some cumulative manpower charts, and we looked at the background on the documentation, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but basically we charted out where he was required to accelerate, notices we gave, responses where he promised to accelerate, and then when we gave the notices to cure. And what you can see is every time we were able to show that he failed to accelerate, failed to do what he promised to do. Then we took a look at the schedule. We looked at what the critical path was, and what you see in the schedule, this was something that should have been cut in the baseline schedule. He had 4 structures he was working on. He had won 4 bids from the city, and he did not have the manpower to run these four different projects at once. So he did not have the resources to execute the schedule in accordance to what he had planned. As a result, he started jumping his crews back and forth between the structures, and that caused him a great deal of lost efficiency, and it also caused him to do poor quality work, which resulted in pointing and patching. So what we were able to do with our schedule analysis is to show that out of the 116 days that he was claiming, 108 days was due to repairing the concrete work that he had performed. Also, he had underbid the project by about $2.7 million. So For the owner, this was a good result because at the end of the day, we were able to keep the responsibility with the subcontractor. The subcontractor, once he was presented with all this material, realized that he was not going to recover his claims. He ended up giving them up and actually paying compensation to the contractor and the owner. But the other thing I'd like to deal with is, I think this is particularly relevant to design build, is the accounting function. I think as an owner, you need to be very careful about keeping track of the accounting on the project. Here we had a unforeseen condition on the project. There was definitely a delay to the subcontractor. He had a right to submit a claim. He did. He submitted it for $363,000. And we did our normal analysis. We requested additional documentation and looked at the schedule analysis and analyzed the costs. What we found was that he had planned to do these two structures at the same time using a shared crane. And while there was a delay to facility 36, he made a claim for that amount of time on the project. But when we did the analysis, we found that facility 49 was also delayed due to the fault of the contractor. So he was going to have that crane out there for the entire period of time, whether or not facility 36 was delayed. So on the entitlement issues, under a schedule analysis, he was not entitled to the claim. But then we went into his financial records, and he had claimed 846 hours of crane operator time. Yet his timesheets only showed less than half of that time. And then when we looked at the months, he was claiming 5 additional months of delay on facility 36, but the actual crane time for facility 36 was only 2 months. When we presented this all to the contractor and we were prepared to submit it to the owner, the contractor decided that he would reduce his claim, and he ended up completely withdrawing it because he didn't feel like he could substantiate it. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about design build and risk management. And what I see the biggest advantage to design build is the integration of the supply team into the design process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but this whole idea that the suppliers are better off designing portions of their work and giving input into the design early is key to, I think, an integrated approach in design build. For many years in this country, we have achieved efficiencies through specialization. But what we found is the use of specialized subcontractors in that in a linear fashion has begun to produce great inefficiencies through the relationships that are developed in the adversarial relations. And that by integrating those processes, we can cut a lot of waste and time out of a project. And of course, one of the key tools for that is to use BIM, which can be the glue that integrates the teams together. And so, you know, during the St. McGraw-Hill survey, they did some surveys on people, and they asked whether they thought BIM and integrated project delivery could reduce risks on projects, and overwhelmingly people thought that they would. Finally, I'd just like to go through a little project that we have in the UK. I've had the opportunity to work in the UK now for several years, and they use an integrated project delivery system under design build there, and it's very effective. And so this was a project that was done, and I think key to it was they co-located the client, the designers, and the major vendors all in the same office building. And not only were they in the same office, but they sat next to each other at the same desk. They use their basically visitors desks, so when you come in, you don't have an assigned desk. You choose whatever desk is close to the team you're working with. And that allows the client to input it into the design in real time and really cuts a lot of the efficiency down. On this project, there was over $24 million in savings of efficiencies. And I'm not going to go through these, but these were the business plan, or the goals of the team that were developed, and they may be appropriate for your project, they may not, but they were appropriate for this job. And you know, they made certain commitments as a team to be collaborative, to pay on time, to appreciate the needs of their suppliers. Sometimes you can find that if you schedule something for a supplier during a low time, he can give you a much better service. And you'll see that they had key performance indicators that didn't just focus on time and money. They had other issues like safety and client satisfaction. And these were all used as part of the compensation methods. So that's the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Phil. One thing I wanted to point out was that the Design Build Institute of America has a professional's guide to managing the design phase of a design build project. And that's available through the website, and that addresses a lot of the unfortunate stories that Phil was relating during the meeting here. Let's see, we'll go to some of the questions. What is the best way for an owner to manage the risk of differing soil conditions?
Yeah, so the principle behind the differing soil conditions is that by eliminating that risk in a contractor's bid, you get a lower price. And then if the event occurs, the contractor would be granted a change order. So typically what you'll find is that the amount of the bid will be lower than whatever the contingencies will cost. But obviously doing careful investigations of the soils beforehand is important. And also we've seen cases where, you know, if you do assign that risk to a bidder, that you understand what the risk is being assigned. We've seen some contracts where the contractors have used you know, basically unit prices on the things that we felt were too low and that might have been used to manipulate the situation. So theoretically, I don't think an unclassified site is the way to go. I think you provide a change order, but you got to recognize that unforeseen conditions are something that the only way a contractor can deal with them is through very large contingencies, which come out of your bid money.
Okay. Have you found that the processes like formal partnering or lean techniques reduce the likelihood of claims? These strategies seem to align more with design build than other methodologies?
Yeah, I think they're extremely important, and they do reduce claims. For one thing, a contract cannot address all the issues that need to be addressed by a project team. And one of the things that I think is an advantage in partnering is that you can begin to define in more detail how the construction processes will work. And just as a simple example, if you say written notice has to be given under the contract of a claim, what does that mean? Does that mean I can send you an email? Does it mean I have to send you certified mail? Those are the kind of issues that through a partnering session you can work out and get a good understanding of how you're going to deal with these issues in the future.
Yeah, those communication protocols are important. What's the average change order rate for design build projects compared to traditional design bid build?
Yeah, so I don't have those statistics with me. I know I was at one seminar where design build has a much lower number of change orders than traditional projects, but I don't have the statistics. If you do, I'd appreciate seeing them.
I didn't have time to put that together yet. The history of claims slide that you had, was that related to design build projects, or was that just projects in general excluding design build?
No, those were projects in general.
Okay. Well, let's see. Have we got any others? Have you? Okay, I went through that one.
Phil, I'll jump in. This is Mike Meredith. I was trying to get a question in. As an organizer, I'm struggling with that with the technology. But the question is, like from where you sit in the industry, is there anything that you can think of that you would recommend to DBIA that we could do to help our owners? Is it additional training, education, that type of thing, as it relates to this risk management discussion?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue I run into with alternative delivery projects, including design build, is that owners seem to slip back into a mindset of design bid build, and they tend to view the parties in those fashions, and that often can destroy the advantages that you're trying to obtain. So really understanding the unique features of design build, I think design build is the future because it's the only delivery model that comprehensively embraces integrated project delivery. And I think integrated project delivery is where the real efficiency gains in the construction industry are in the future. They're talking 10 to 30% gains by just improving the relationships and the contractual mechanisms used in integrated project delivery. So I think that's a huge benefit that we can see.
Oh, thank you. It seems like investing in that formal partnering or lean strategies. You also use the example of how BIM is a technology that's helping sort of clean up and make the process of building a little bit more fluid, right? And therefore, potentially reducing these conflicts, where risk exists.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you can have a project where instead of the contractor submitting an RFI, the designer waiting 14 days and then submitting or the owner submitting a response to the RFI, and then the contractor submitting the change order, and then the owner's representative making a decision on the change order, and that takes 6 months or 3 months or whatever. If they could sit down in a room in 10 minutes, go through the BIM modeling and look at the problem and sit down and decide it in 4 or 5 hours and issue a change order or a change directive or whatever's required in that meeting, you've just saved a huge amount of money on both sides. And I think that's what BIM can offer you if you use it correctly.
Okay. We have 8 minutes left in the hour, but if there's no other questions, there's no reason that we have to use up all of the time. I haven't seen any other questions come in. Have you, Gloria?
No, I haven't seen any other questions. You saw the one on soil?
Right.
Okay, yep, that's it.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Phil. We really appreciate your input into this, and would like to encourage everybody to keep in mind our next owner webinar is coming up in September 18th, and we're going to be looking at the legislative agenda of what's gone on in California and what's coming up so that we can advance the cause of design build and make it a universally acceptable practice. So once again, thanks very much, Phil, and thank you to all the attendees for hearing us out here. Thanks.
Thanks again, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you.